Welcome, everyone. It is finally the end of the year, and with that comes the college football playoff. A lot of controversy on whether, it should be grown in the next coming years. Um, that's a take for another day, but we have some very, very interesting matchups coming up New Year's Eve. Unfortunately, my family booked a dinner, 6:30 p.m., so I'm going to be on my phone watching
Oh
as best
boy.
I can. But yeah, Sam and I are going to kind of break these games down. It's really exciting. So we'll start with TCU Michigan. Sam, how do you see this kind of game playing out? What is your take?
I think this is a lot closer matchup than people think. I mean, not a lot of people are high on TCU coming into the playoffs. Said they have a, cupcake schedule. But when I look at Michigan, I see the same thing. And I look at this strength of schedule numbers. Michigan sat at eighth all year. TCU was only one behind them at ninth. And when I look at TCU's schedule, I personally, just my belief is that they played better teams than Michigan did. I mean, Michigan starts the year off with Hawaii's and Colorado State's. And yeah, TCU had those too, but Oklahoma State was ranked at the time they played, and they beat Kansas State, beat Texas, beat Kansas, who was good at the time, beat Oklahoma, who was ranked at the time. Like they beat who was in front of them. So obviously Michigan has a better win. That's probably the best win in the country. But I think the two teams are fairly even. And I think it's all going to come down to stopping Michigan's run game. You got to make J.J. McCarthy beat you. He's questionable as a passer. Not many people that I've seen are high on him as an elite throwing talent. So if you can stop Donovan Edwards, because no Blake Corum, so if you can stop Donovan Edwards and force some third and longs, I think that's going to be TCU's recipe to success on defense. Uh, on there on T also going well. Okay, so this isn't going for TCU, but that 3-3-5 defense they run kind of creates a lot of holes for the run game. So on Michigan's side, Michigan has to use Donovan Edwards, and he's got to be on his A game and exploiting those holes. I think that's the only way Michigan's going to be able to really assert their dominance and just hold the ball. So my score for this game, I got 33-21 Michigan. Somewhat close game, but I think Michigan is over a better team. It's just going to come down to Max Duggan and Quentin Johnson on the offense. They got to put up points to match Michigan.
Yeah, and I think kind of like you were talking about, if we want to compare the resumes, I think from top to bottom, you look at TCU's resume, they beat a bad Oklahoma team by 31 pretty convincingly. They come back the next week, beat Kansas by 7, who has proven to be a much improved team this year. They barely squeaked by Oklahoma State the following week in double overtime. They beat the same Kansas State team we just saw them lose to in overtime by 10. Then they beat Texas Tech the following week, or 2 weeks later, by 10 points. And then what my opinion is the most impressive win for them was beating Texas by 7, middle of November. They held
Defense
Texas
looked dominant in that game.
yeah, exactly. They held them to 28 rushing yards. Mind you, Texas has arguably the best running back double punch in the country in Bijan Robinson and Roshan Johnson. This kind of proves to me that, if they really want to, they're capable of stopping the run. I mean, those two guys probably are no Donovan Edwards, Blake Corum, but they're pretty close, I'd say. And maybe
I'd say
Texas
Bijan
doesn't.
is better, in
I
my
mean,
opinion.
Bijan by himself is better, but I don't know if the run game
Yeah,
for Texas
overall.
yeah, just because of Michigan's offensive line, which I'll talk about in a second. But that kind of shows me, just because you're a talented running back does not mean that you're going to run all over TCU. And I do agree with you. I think that they do have a bit of a better resume. I mean, in that game, they also held Quinn Ewers to 17 of 39 passing with 1 pick, 0 touchdowns. Texas had no offensive touchdowns that entire game, and Quinn Ewers
Yeah.
had a QBR of 20. And I know we're both pretty high on Quinn. And when you compare that to Michigan's resume, I mean, they beat Maryland and Iowa each by 7. I mean, they had a big win in the Big House against Penn State by 24. But they barely squeaked by Illinois by 2, and I know Illinois is a very good defense, but that's still like a pretty close game. And then obviously
Yeah,
the recent win against Ohio State. But these two games being kind of close in their dates between like Illinois and Ohio State is 1 week apart. That kind of shows me that this Michigan team is also kind of vulnerable, as you were alluding to, Sam. I think that maybe this was a case of them looking ahead to their matchup against Ohio State. But this kind of shows that they're not 100% a surefire win team. You don't know exactly what team Jim Harbaugh is bringing to the table. I'm sure they'll be ready. And if it is true that they were looking ahead, they'd probably be more ready than many people expect. But I mean, when you look at the offenses, for TCU, they have the 15th most yards per game, put up the 6th most points per game in the country at just over 40. They have the 25th best passing offense in the country. They put up over 273 passing yards a game, almost exactly 200 rushing yards per game, also 25th best in the country. A very above average, pretty very solid offense TCU has going, led by Max Duggan. How do you say his name? Max Duggan, is that right?
Duggan. Just
Duggan. Okay, cool, cool.
Duggan.
Yeah, and I mean they've only turned the ball over 10 times this entire season. You compare that to Michigan's offense. I mean they've turned it over even fewer times actually. They're only 7 turnovers. They're the 27th. They have the 27th most yards per game in the country this year. 7th most points in the country at just over 40, just like TCU. 210 passing yards per game, which is honestly well in the bottom third in college football this year. I don't, there's a lot of hype about JJ McCarthy being a big improvement for them. I personally don't see it. I mean, sure, he can make some throws, but to me, he hasn't really proved. Yeah, I don't think he's proven to be an elite like passer at this point. I know he's just a sophomore, but obviously where they're getting the bulk of their offense this year is through the run game, the 5th best in the country, over 243 rushing yards per game. And we know their backfield's elite, even without Blake Corum. And I think Donovan Edwards can easily fill in for that MCL injury that Corum unfortunately faced. He could very easily have a 150+ yard day, in my opinion. He said he thrives in these big games. I believe him. His last 2 games, I think it was 186 yards rushing and 210 yards rushing, something crazy like that. And it's also a testament to how creative Michigan really is with their run attack. They'll run a bunch of counter plays, they'll run end arounds, they'll really keep you guessing to where you can't just load the box and just fill the gaps like you would against a normal run team. They really keep it creative, keep you on your toes. I think that's what really makes them super elite on the ground. And now if we're looking at the defenses, I think this is really where Michigan pulls away. I think TCU's defense is very average. 385 total yards per game, 25 points allowed per game, which is just about average. And then both in the pass and rushing games, are just almost exactly average. 236 yards per game allowed through the air, and then about 150 on the ground. They have forced 19 turnovers this season, which is a pretty big stat line that'll probably conflict a lot with Michigan only turning the ball over 7 times the entire season. I would love to see who comes away on top there in the turnover battle. But one thing that I don't think is talked about enough is that TCU does have arguably the best deep, DB room in this entire playoff. I mean,
that's very true.
They got on both sides of the ball guys that can just play man coverage if they need to, and I think that that's what they're going to probably have to do. If you're Sonny Dykes, you got to expect run against Michigan, and that's going to leave guys open on the perimeter, not open, but in one-on-one matchups. And I think that they do have the ability to cover Michigan's wide receivers. So I don't know. I guess we can get into. There's some other stuff that I found that was pretty interesting about this matchup. First and foremost, this is TCU's first bye week they've had since late September, which to me means that they're getting much needed rest. They're gonna get a lot healthier, throughout this week, and it'd be very interesting to see because I know Michigan's bye week was a lot more recent than that. I also think it's really cool because no one really would have predicted this matchup between TCU and Michigan at the very beginning of the year. I mean, when you look at it, TCU had the longest odds of any team to actually make the playoff in the history of the college football playoff. And they had the first year head coach in Sonny Dykes usually you don't get to a playoff in your first year. That does not
usually
happen.
Don't go undefeated throughout the whole regular season either. Yeah.
Exactly. And the same can also be said about Michigan. I mean, Jim Harbaugh was looking for that job in the NFL, lost his OC and his DC, and not even beyond that, he lost some really, really talented guys on the defensive line. I mean, Aiden Hutchinson is a name that is a pretty household name.
Ojabo.
Yeah, exactly. And here they are, back again. So yeah, and then I think one last really, really interesting element of this game is that TCU and Michigan are the 2 best second half teams in the entire country. They each have 7 second half comebacks on the year, which is crazy to me that 2 teams can rely so much on the second half performance that they make the playoff and go undefeated in the regular season, each of them. So I do think Michigan is a little bit better in the second half. Listen to this stat, Sam. Michigan is outscoring opponents 226 to 35 in the second half
Wow.
this year, which I
Jeez.
mean, to me, I think that if this game is remotely close at halftime, I'm still very confident Michigan can pull it out, and that is a true testament to their offensive line play. They won the award for the best offensive line for the second consecutive year in a row, and for good reason. I mean, these guys will just wear you out. They don't get worried if they're down at the half because they know they can come out there in the second half and just tire you out. They'll just ground and pound you till there's just no answer. And I think that might be what happened. So I wrote down a couple of major keys for the game. One of which being, can TCU's defensive line really step up to the plate and penetrate that Michigan offensive line? Even if it's not in the form of necessarily stopping Brian Edwards, can they maybe put pressure on JJ McCarthy when he steps back to throw? That's going to be like something that we really have to see if they can really stop the run at all as well. If he needs to win the game through the air, can JJ McCarthy do that? If TCU just has another Texas-like performance against what we both agree is probably a better running back scheme and situation Michigan has, can he win? Can he make those throws that he needs to put Michigan on top? I'm honestly not so sure that he can. I'm
I'm
kind
right
of
there with you on that.
yeah, I'm kind of thinking that Michigan is going to be able to run the ball successfully enough to where he doesn't need to make those throws. Might be able to make a few, but if it comes down to it, I would not, put JJ McCarthy over Max Duggan. Another thing that I brought up earlier was who's winning the turnover battle. Right now, the numbers point to TCU possibly winning that. That could be a big edge for them in this game. They probably need to win that to have a solid chance in this game and also capitalize on those turnovers. It's not just enough to win, get a fumble recovery, get a pick. If you're not turning those into touchdowns, I think that's something that is really important for TCU to do. And lastly, can either of these quarterbacks take over the game? Can we see a masterclass from Max Duggan where he just, goes all out and, Michigan just suddenly does not seem like they're the fifth best defense in the country? It's possible. I'm not sure how likely it really is. I think that he's been somewhat inconsistent recently, but you never really know with a guy that has that much heart. The way I kind of see this game playing out, to kind of conclude, is I think Michigan does stick to what they know. I think they run the ball right down TCU's throat, and kind of just tire and outmatch their defensive line. I don't think TCU has the talent, and I don't think they get completely gashed necessarily as badly as some people might think. But I think it's enough for Michigan's pass game to open where JJ McCarthy can make some he can make some throws to keep them ahead. And Rohan has typed in the chat that he thinks TCU is winning it. They have a decent chance. They do have a decent chance. I think Michigan is just too talented and too big up front. I think when they load the box to expect to run against Michigan, it's going to leave McCarthy to have some easy throws that he'll be able to make. And I think Michigan's defense does shine against Max Duggan. I don't think their offense is terribly amazing outside of Quentin Johnson and that star running back they have. If TCU were to win this game, they need to do a lot of things right. And they come out swinging, be up by at least a touchdown or double digits at halftime. I don't think the question is, can TCU stop the run? I don't think they can. It's can they get Michigan's offense off the field on third down, play good red zone defense, force turnovers like we said, and hit on those big explosive plays. TCU does have the most explosive offense in the country. They have the most 50-plus yards play out of any team in college football. And I think that if they want a chance in this game, they're going to have to hit on those big plays. My final score prediction, after all that being said, is Michigan 31, TCU 17. Take Michigan to cover. I think they're just too good in the trenches, to be honest.
Yeah, and kind of not to totally agree with what Rohan said, but just Max Duggan, he won me over in that Kansas State game. We don't throw around the term single-handedly a lot, but he did single-handedly put that team on his back, and you could see him. He looked like a UFC fighter out there. He's bloody everywhere. He had countless injuries. He was practically fainting. Like, he brought that team back on his shoulders. And I mean, yeah, that kind of stuff wins me over. And kind of a hot take, but if this game going into the fourth quarter is less than, if it's a touchdown or less, I could see TCU pulling that out. I'm not sold on JJ at all. And Duggan, him and Quentin Johnson's going to be a big time NFL talent. I think if this game is a one-score game going into the fourth quarter, my confidence is in TCU to be the one who pulls it out.
Yeah, I agree. I think if it is close in the fourth, TCU has a very, very good shot. It's just, can it be close in the fourth is the question. I
Yeah,
think
no, definitely.
I think that third quarter is really going to determine it, because Michigan always comes out swinging in that third quarter, and if TCU can kind of stifle them, keep them at least somewhat quiet, that'd be a really, really big advantage for them. I guess we'll shift over to the Georgia OSU game. This game is very interesting in my opinion. I imagine this game being a little bit less one-sided, and I'll kind of tell you why. So let's start with Georgia. So their resume, they have that 46-point dominating win week 1 versus Oregon, a 27-13 win over what was at the time number 1 Tennessee, a somewhat concerning 16-6 win over Kentucky not so long ago, where their offense seemed to struggle a bit. That it could also just be a testament to Kentucky's defense, which seems to show up here and there really well, and then other times not so much. And then that 50-30 victory over LSU in the SEC championship game. When we look at Georgia's offense, they have the 8th most yards per game in the country, 11th most points per game in the country, around 39, 19th most passing yards per game at 285, 17th most rushing yards per game at 207. And then they did give up 17 turnovers throughout the season, that offense. When we look at their defense, they have the 9th fewest yards per game allowed at 292, the 2nd fewest points allowed per game. This is the big stat. Only 12.8 points allowed per game on average, which is very, very impressive. Second to only Illinois of all teams, which is the team that we said Michigan did struggle against, which makes sense. The hole in this defense is pretty glaring. I think it's their pass defense. They allowed the 51st least passing yards in the entire country at 215. That's not that pass defense is still well above average. It's just
Especially guys like Keely Ringo and Malachi Starks back there to guard up. They can turn on at any moment.
Yeah, I completely agree. But it's just, if you compare that to their run defense, it's definitely the weak point of that defense. I think if Ohio State is to attack them through the air, that is probably Georgia's biggest vulnerability. And like I said, Georgia does have the best run defense in the country. Listen to this, they only allow 77 rushing yards per game. That is just such a crazy stat to me. And they've also forced 16 turnovers throughout the season. Kind of shifting focus to Ohio State, we look at their resume. They had a 31-point win against Wisconsin, 44-point dominating win at home against Iowa, who, I thought was a pretty decent team going into that game. Kind of proved me otherwise. That 13-point win at Penn State was a really gutsy win, never easy to play in Beaver Stadium. And then the 22-point loss not so long ago to Michigan in that big rivalry matchup where they, kind of got dominated. But, as Josh Pate said, I actually don't think that they necessarily got dominated in the trenches the same way people are saying they did. I think that, Michigan hit on a few big plays, which isn't to take away from Michigan. I think they played an extremely, extremely good game. But I don't think Ohio State is necessarily going to get physically outmatched as easily as some people are kind of assuming. So we look at Ohio State's offense. They have the 7th best offense in terms of yards per game, 2nd most points per game in the country, around 44.5. But that's also in direct conflict with the stat I just said earlier about Georgia giving up the 2nd fewest rushing just total yards total points per game. Pardon me. Their offense is known for their passing attack. They're the 14th best passing offense in the country, 294 passing yards per game. They have the 28th best rushing offense in the country, 198.5 yards per game. And they only gave up 10 turnovers throughout the season, which is pretty solid. It's better than Georgia. On their defense is also really good. They have first-year defensive coordinator Jim Knowles, I believe from Oklahoma State. Maybe not as good of a season as people would have expected, but when you look at the numbers, the 11th fewest passing or total yards allowed per game at 304, 13th fewest points allowed per game at 19.3, 14th fewest pass yards per game at 184, and then 23rd fewest run yards per game at 120. Some other stuff I kind of want to get into real quick before I kind of give my final breakdown on how the game goes. Two of Georgia's 4 top receivers are tight ends. One of them is Kenny McIntosh, their running back. So 3 of the 4 either tight ends or running backs. Now, when you look at Ohio State's pass defense, they really struggle against wide receivers, out wide. Where they don't struggle is that they're actually the second best in the nation at covering running backs and tight ends in the passing game. So this really plays into Ohio State's advantage. I don't think it's being talked about super well, and I'll kind of use this as an explanation later, but I do think this opens the door for McConkey to really have a good game at wide receiver for Georgia. Shout out Josh Page for that, but also I do think CJ Stroud has not been the mobile threat that we maybe thought he would be earlier in his career, which makes it a lot easier for Georgia to guess that he's going to be in the pocket. When you know where he's going to be, you can way more easily send pressure, and we know what Will Muschamp and the rest of that defensive crew over there at Georgia has done historically. The major keys in the game, for Ohio State, can they both establish the run against that dominant, Georgia defense and stop it, unlike their game against Michigan? Can CJ Stroud just take over this game at any point? We know he has the capability to do that, but will he actually do it? I guess we can find out. And then can other wide receivers not named Marvin Harrison Jr. step up to the plate? There's a bunch of other guys that they have back there that are very capable. Will they do it? Another will we see type of answer there. For Georgia, can they start fast and set the tempo very similar to that LSU game and the SEC championship game? If they do, I think they can definitely just pull away and play their type of tempo and play their game and just dominate the rest of the game. Can Stetson Bennett make big throws down the field? I'm not so sure he can. I still don't think that he has elite arm talent, but maybe he proves me wrong. And then can Georgia's defensive back room, can their corners and safeties lock down that passing game like they did against Tennessee? They really held Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman in that game. They were kind of not really a major factor. Maybe they do the same thing with Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka. So here's how I see the game playing out. I don't actually think UGA, like I said, gets manhandles Ohio State as much up front. I think they have a lot of talent, Ohio State, obviously, and Georgia, but I think that they keep it close enough up front to keep it close. I think Ohio State's going to be able to throw the ball pretty well. LSU dropped 500 passing yards on Georgia in that SEC championship game. And then I think this game just comes down to the play calling of Jim Knowles, Ohio State's first-year defensive coordinator. Can they really rattle Stetson Bennett? Can they throw them off course from what they're normally doing and make him throw into some tight windows? I think Ohio State has some success and they keep it close in this game, I'm really taking Georgia's experience and just their physical and just their toughness mentally and physically, honestly. They've been on this big stage before. I haven't seen Ohio State necessarily perform to the same level as Georgia has on this big stage. So I'm taking Georgia to win, not to cover though. I think the game will be close. Georgia 31, Ohio State 27. Sam, you see it a bit differently, or?
Yeah, I don't see the game too differently from you, but I think it'd be a little more lopsided. OSU just kind of not impressed me the tail end of the season. I think the way they came out against Michigan was flat. CJ Stroud has been slightly disappointed, and they're just too one-dimensional on offense for my liking. Trayvon Henderson going down hurts the running back room, and I think the backs as a whole have just been disappointing for Ohio State. They can't run the ball very well. The O-line has been disappointing. Michigan I do believe they dominated them in the trenches. I don't know how that's going to hold up against guys like Jalen Carter coming through the middle, especially with CJ Stroud's immobility like you highlighted. So I don't know. I think Keely Ringo can, if anyone can put up a fight against Marvin Harrison here, it's him. We'll see what Emeka Egbuka could do, but I do not think this game is going to be very close. I think Georgia just kind of dominates them on all facets of the ball, on offense, defense, trenches. everything. I mean, Harrison will do his thing. I hope Stroud does his thing. It's gonna take the game of his life because I think the corners, the OSU corners, are just cooked. I don't know. I know Georgia's pass offense isn't the strongest, but I don't think OSU's corners are either. That defense has just been disappointing all year. Michael's going through the Ohio State schedule and noting on some of their notable wins, but I think what we're forgetting is a game like Northwestern, where they almost lost to a team that ended. They were not bowl eligible. That's for sure. And they really gave OSU a run for their money because if you can't run against Northwestern, I don't know how you're going to expect to run the ball against Georgia. So my score prediction for the game is it's going to be basically exactly like Tennessee, 27-13 Georgia. Georgia goes on to the finals, and I know OSU fans kind of hope this is like a 2015 thing where you slip into the playoffs as a 4 seed and show everyone that you were misjudged and you end up winning the national championship. But I don't exactly think you'll be getting that kind of fairy tale ending this time. I think Georgia routs you. The defense just shuts down CJ Stroud on the offense. They come out flat. Georgia runs the ball down your throat, throws to Bowers, Washington, all their guys, and Georgia wins handedly 27-13, never even feels close.
Yeah, and kind of in a similar light to where I see, the TCU game possibly being closer than people expect. I think that, you know, some people might be expecting this game to be a bit closer. But in the same exact vein, I think that this game could very easily just get out of hand. Georgia and Kirby Smart and crew could just, like you said, just dominate in all facets of the game. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think Ohio State has something to prove, especially Ryan Day. He has not been the best in big games, and I think that for him to really get his fan base to believe that he is the coach for them long term, he needs to start winning these big games. I mean, the last 2 years, losing to your biggest rival by far, especially even at home in Columbus and the Horseshoe. Not
Those
a
fans
good
aren't
look.
happy with them right now. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, which is crazy because he also is 11-1, which by any other team standards,
Harbaugh
it's
might have
a
had a point though. When you do start on third base, with the recruits and the network that they have set up, it's not all that hard to go 11-1 in the Big Ten these days with the way those divisions are set up.
I agree. I agree. So here's how I kind of see the game. I already gave my breakdown, but I also have some best bets. I have some player props since we already gave our score prediction. This is just based on Prize Picks. I did this just literally a few minutes ago, but I have Lad McConkey over 50.5 receiving yards. Like we said, Ohio State is really good at defending against tight ends and running backs, through the air. Not so good defending wide receivers, though. They're 109th in the country at that. So I think this really opens it up for Bennett to hit some, short throws to McConkey, him to, get some maybe yards after a catch, some yak. But yeah, Quentin Johnson, I think he's going to have over 13.5 fantasy points. He's hit it a lot recently. And I also think that, Michigan's pass defense isn't amazing. I think like I said earlier, their run defense is a lot better than their pass defense. Not that their pass defense is bad by any measure, but Max Duggan is probably going to fling the ball a bit. Donovan Edwards over 125 or over 120.5 rushing yards. I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. The guy is a beast. Can't wait to see what he does in the future. And then lastly, Emeka Egbuka for Ohio State over 5 receptions. He's also hit that a lot recently, but even beyond that, I think that Georgia might look at what worked for Michigan in locking down Marvin Harrison Jr. And do the same thing, which I think opens up the door for Egbuka to really step up and have a good game. So that's kind of how I kind of see those bets going. By the way, again, this is not to encourage sports betting or gambling or anything like that. Be very careful with how you spend your money. But yeah, it should be a very interesting slate of games. Like I said earlier, I'm gonna be on my phone watching. But yeah, I'll definitely be texting the guys as the game goes on. But any other closing thoughts, Sam?
No, I think this playoffs will be better than last year. I certainly think the games will be a little slightly more competitive, but the two favorites look like the two that we all thought. As far as recent as a couple weeks ago, everything we've known for a little bit now that it would be Georgia, Michigan. Let's see who the other two are, and let's see how close the games get. But I think at the end of the
Yeah.
day, almost everyone can agree that we think those will be the two teams meeting in the rematch of last year's semifinal to see who wins it all.
Yeah, and that'll be a really interesting rematch if it happens, because I
I
know
agree.
a lot of those Michigan guys are coming back and they want vengeance. So yeah,
Not
one
to spoil any prediction videos we do, but I would definitely take Georgia in that rematch to just repeat them.
oh God, you're giving away all our predictions, Sam. What are we gonna do?
Well, we'll
One
see what
interesting
happens. Hopefully, we can get some upsets this weekend.
one interesting thought I saw on Twitter, also from Josh Pate. At this point, I might as well just be on the show, but or have him on the show. He said, would it be a good idea to have the number one seed pick who they play in the semifinal? Because this is a situation. I mean, I know it's not done in any other sport, but this is a situation where if I'm Georgia, um, Ohio State is probably one of, if not the last team I want to play out of the other three teams available. I mean, between them and I think it's very clear that they would prefer to play TCU. They could definitely probably just outmatch them in the trenches and have a very, not easy victory, but a relatively easy victory in comparison to playing Ohio State. Um, so I guess leave in the comments if you think that would be something interesting. I don't know. I think it might be cool to shake things up like that instead of maybe extending the playoff, but you never know. So yeah, leave some score predictions in the comments.
Leave some suggestions for the rest of this week's videos too.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to be dropping, I think Vinay and I are dropping an NFL power rankings video very shortly. Then we'll also have our weekly big pod Friday, I think. So if everything stays on course, that'll be the schedule. So yeah, like and sub, please share the video. And then yeah, just leave some score predictions and also some thoughts on that interesting idea in the comments. But yeah, really appreciate it.